Great. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Africa Program and the Wilson Center, we want to warmly welcome you to this conversation on religious institutions and peacebuilding in Ethiopia. We're glad to have all of you who have joined us in person and those who are joining us online as well. My name is Aaron Stanley. I'm a Senior Program Associate with the Africa Program here at the Wilson Center. I'm so glad to have this conversation today with one of our Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding Fellows, Yurga Bebe. This is part of the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding, which is a network of 22 African policy research and academic institutions that work with the Wilson Center's Africa program to inform U.S. and international peacebuilding policies on Africa. We help to build the next generation of African peacebuilders through its scholarship program, which this is a part of, and create a pan-African network of African peacebuilding organizations, practitioners, and experts to collaborate and share knowledge, best practices, and lessons learned on peacebuilding in Africa. Yurga joins us from SVMP member, the Institute for Peace and Security Studies in Addis Ababa, where he's a PhD candidate. He has more than 13 years of experience in teaching and research at 3 public universities across Ethiopia, and prior to his time at the Wilson Center, he was a research fellow at the Global and European Institute at Leipzig University. We're also very glad to welcome Terrence Lyons to comment and share his own experience around this topic, as well as on Yurga's research brief, which is soon to come from the Wilson Center. Terrence is a professor of conflict resolution at the Carter School at George Mason University, and those who know him know that he's a long-term follower and a distinguished scholar on the region and Ethiopia in particular. Terrence, thank you for joining us here at the Wilson Center.
My pleasure.
I've had the chance to work with Yurga, and I'm very excited about the research that we're going to hear about today and have the opportunity to discuss. Yurga has primary data from an area of Ethiopia that has been highly affected by the conflicts over the past few years. And that data provides incredibly deep and rich insights into peacebuilding in Ethiopia, but also contributes, I believe, very, very effectively to how we understand how religion and religious actors impact peace and community engagement during times of conflict. Yurga's research is incredibly in-depth and exactly the type of research that we believe can contribute to this policy development and these policy conversations around U.S. Relations with African countries and peacebuilding efforts across the world. So with that, I'd like to welcome you all again, and I'd like to share the floor with Yurga.
Thank you, Aaron, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me both in person and online. So I would like to start my presentation with posing a question to you all, and the question is like this. What roles do religious institutions have in conflict? So this question has been the subject of academic and policy debate over the years. And mainly the relation between religious institution with conflict is approached in dichotomy, both as an instrument of violence and also an instrument of peace. However, it's very recently that religion is viewed as an agency and resources for peace and peace building there. And there are a number of ways and there are a number of case studies where religion and religious actors contributed to the end of war and thereby contributing to sustainable peace and stability, especially in Africa. So Ethiopia has a long history of conflict and violences, and the 2-year war in Tigray region, the ongoing war in Amhara and Oromia regions are the latest of the chapters in the long history of conflict in the country. So the overall efforts towards them are very not as such effective enough to address the root causes of the conflict as well as to maintain stability, and many of them are usually state-centered. And on the other hand, as a multi-phase and a deeply religious state, there are so many religious institution actors which can be taken as resources for peace building in the country. So this research is mainly drawn on fieldwork in North Ethiopia, which has been plagued by the war, especially in the past few years, and mainly it takes on case studies of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which have a deep presence in the North Ethiopia since the 4th century AD, and especially the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Lalibela and Sagota towns are basically the case study which I take during the fieldwork. So I try to explore the role that religious institutions have, and I found out there are a multitude of roles, from being a humanitarian actor to mediators and even the main governing actor of public affairs, from health to energy affairs of the society. So with this introductory note, the contents of my follow-up presentation will be to look the main framework, especially 5 framework, which I look and which enable to understand the complex interplay of religious institution, conflict, and peace in the country. And following that, I will deep dive into the role of religious institution for peace building from the case study in Lalibela and in Sagota towns. Also, this also can be also extended to Waldea towns as well. So there are complex relations between religious institution, conflict, and peace in Ethiopia, and especially there are 5 frameworks which enable us to understand this complex relations of religion, conflict, and peace. So first, there have been certain incidents of religious-based violences in the past few years, and here religion can be considered as a causal factor or a driver for conflict and violences. So there is different incidents in different parts of the country in the past few years where religion was basically the main cause for such violences. On the other hand, religion, and by extension religious institutions, were a mobilizer. They're basically a catalyst, and they were used as an instrument for mobilization, at the same time for legitimizing and delegitimizing violences in the country. And this is especially the case in the war in the North Ethiopia, where religious actors were used as instruments of mobilization. And the third aspect of the interplay in religion, conflict, and peace has been this sort of religion as a peace building, or as a religious institution as a peace building actor, whereby religion are considered is mainly the main instrument for conflict transformation, for just addressing conflicts and to transform towards a more peaceful context. And another dynamics in this is that where religious institutions has been attacked and their adherents has been attacked, so religious institution also been a victim. They are victims of violence, and different religious institutions and their fellows has been attacked in different parts of the country by different actors. And the final aspect of this interplay is the intra-religious dynamics. So this includes the existing contestation, divisions, and at some times unity among different units in the religion. So especially when you take, since my case study, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, we can see what happened in 2018, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and its synod in exile have been united with the Holy Synod in Addis, especially with mediation efforts by Prime Minister Abiy. And following the war in North Ethiopia, especially in the past few months, then I hope you all have followed that, and we see some sort of divisions between the Holy Synod in Addis and Council of Archbishops in Tigray region. That's have to do with basically what happens during the war in the North Ethiopia. So this interreligious dynamics includes the sort of unity and in certain contexts split within that particular religion. So building on this, so my research was on what religious institutions contributed for peace, especially during war. And I will try to look how they play this positive and peace-building roles, even in the midst of war in Lalibela, Sagota, as well in Waldea towns as well. They all are basically in North Ethiopia. So the two towns, especially Sagota and Lalibela towns, they are basically in war zone, especially as the war which broke out in Tigray region expanded to Amhara region, especially in July 2021. So there's areas where basically, where during this period where there was absence of functional state apparatus and where there was no basic services including telecommunication, financial institution, including bank, electricity, and where the areas were harder to reach, especially where while the people were suffering a lot, then it was inaccessible for humanitarian actors, be that national and international actors. So it's in this context where I situate my research and then try to explore this building roles of religious institutions. So there are multitude of roles from the humanitarian to the mediator role that the church, especially the Orthodox Church in Lalibela, Sagota, and Waldea towns have played. So they were a humanitarian actor. As I said, the areas were inaccessible and it's hard to reach, and the people were suffering a lot. And through established structures in the society, like a DIR in Lalibela, and by having this ad hoc sort of committees established by the church, then the church was able to collect humanitarian assistances for the most impoverished, for the most disadvantaged sections of the society. Even in certain cases, there are around 60,000 kilograms of cereal where the church collected and distributed that to the people. In addition to being a humanitarian actor, then the church was also the main actor in facilitating the public service delivery in this area. So as I said, there was no functional state apparatus, and where different institutions, including health centers, water sector, those in the water and energy sectors, were not functional, but by persuading with workers, as well as by facilitating the payment of salary for civil servants, and in certain contexts, even by purchasing medical drugs and transporting them through ordinary transporters, all the ways of transportation, including the use of animals, donkeys, and human power, then they are able to facilitate this public delivery of public institution in the midst of war or in the middle of the war. In addition to that, they were also facilitating the protection of public institutions and the provision of health service delivery for the people. And in Lalibela, then the church assigned around 150 personnel to protect public institutions, and in Sagota around 24 personnel to protect. And all the salary were even paid by the church. And not only for personnel who protect this public institution, but also for civil servants, the church were also the main financial actor. So as I said, there was no banking sector were closed, and the church were the only financial sources for the people at large. And even it borrows from the local businessmen and distributed this as a forms of salary and as a forms of loan to different sections. So in La Libela, then there were around 6 million Ethiopian birr, which is close to around $130,000 by the exchange rates by the time. And in Sakota, around 2 million Ethiopian birr, which close to around 44,000 US dollar by the exchange rate in that time. And in Moldia, around 5.9 million Ethiopian birr, which close to 130,000 US dollar by then. And then they were paying the salary of civil servant. Even in Sagoda alone, the church pays the salary of 1,076 civil servants. And in La Libela, they also paid the salary in 3 rounds of payments for the people. So in addition to its own finance, then they borrowed that from the local businessmen and distributed as a loan and as a salary for civil servants. So that's another role where church played a very pacifying and positive roles in wartime. And the other point is church was the only place where people gather and where they get such sort of psychosocial support as even in the middle of war. So the church, through different rituals that they then they provide some sort of consolation, some sort of comfort for the people who are stranded by the war. And finally, there was some sort of mediation attempts by the religious institution to mediate between local people and armed groups, at the same time between armed groups and regional governments in the Amhara region. So this multitude of roles that the church played indicators that religious institution contributed for peace building even in the midst of war, in the middle of war. And this is especially interesting where religious actors were used as instruments of mobilization during the war. So with this, it provides a lesson for the practice and for the policy related to peace building, especially in Africa or in Ethiopia as well. So the first is that then it's good to take into consideration of religious dimension of peace building, or to use religious actors as a good resources for peace building in a given conflict. So because in Africa and Ethiopia as well, then villages have a very substantial role, including in private and public lives. And it's important to take this into consideration. And whatever peace building initiative is there, then it's important to also consider religious actors' inclusion in that initiative as well. Also, it gives us a lesson to have this context-based intervention and to look the significant role of the local actors for peace building. And religious institutions also, they can serve as an area where they enable as an entry point for accessing harder to reach areas, for accessing people who are stranded in the war or who have suffered in war zones as well. And then there is, of course, a way whereby such sorts of cooperation between local actors or international, as well as between different religious groups, will be taken as a lesson. So they're not only a single religious actor, but considering multi-phase nature of the state and the different religious actors, then it's quite important to look cooperation between local actors and international religious actors as well. Not only that, across different religious groups or interfaith dialogue across different religion groups in Ethiopia. And then also important to have further research, to have further work, but be it in the academic and in policy world, on the issue of religious institution and peace building. So with this, then I'd like to to point that religious institutions indeed have a very peace-building role in war zone. Although they are considered as instruments of mobilization, then they have huge agency and potentials, resources for being a peace-building actor in a given conflict affected context. So that's all about my presentation, and thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Jurga. Thank you very much. Terrence, over to you.
Thank you, Aaron, and for everybody at the Wilson Center. It's a pleasure to be back here again. I've had the opportunity to play a number of roles here. I'm particularly happy to be part of the Southern Voice Network for Peacebuilding and to be able to be a commenter or discussant on Jurga's presentation and the underlying paper, which I had the chance to read. My first piece of advice, or I guess maybe it is just advice, and it comes as being somebody who's been interested in Ethiopian conflicts and politics and Africa more generally, is that you have data that nobody else has. You really have some excellent fine-grained, rural, data, the kind of local data that we so often don't have when we're thinking about peace building. And so to look for places where you can lean into that data. I'm now going to move on to some theory things, but I wanted to start off by saying that you already have an extraordinary accomplishment with the data collection that you did under circumstances that very, very few scholars of any type were able to get into the areas of active conflict. Now, with that being said, sort of full period, next paragraph, I don't want to undercut that message, but I also think there's some places that you might want to consider how you can sort of widen the frame or link up with some of the bigger themes in the literatures on peace and religion. And this is mostly, I say this so that your extraordinary research can then reach out to people who are not interested in, particular Lalibela and Sukata, but rather larger themes relating to religion and peace building. The first is this actually, I think, more, you referenced some of it, but I think there's also more literature on religion and conflict that is ripe for you to link up to. I'm thinking of the work that was done by the U.S. Institute of Peace, for example, on religious peace building. The work that was done in Jos, in the plateau of Nigeria. There was a lot of people trying to think about the possible role of religious figures there. Second, particularly this time, I'm switching a bit to your theme on the church as a humanitarian actor, which is an excellent part of your overall paper, to point out how the church was able to feed so many people, keep so many people, on the salary, literally on the salary. But I think back to maybe somebody in the room who can remember this better than I, but in the famine of the 1980s, I think it was the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that linked up with other churches in Ethiopia, the Mekene Jesus Church, Lutherans, I believe, to create the Joint Relief Partnership, which was one of the very, very first organizations, non-state organizations, to engage in famine relief in the 1980s. This is obviously before We Are the World and Do They Know It's Christmas and all the huge Western NGOs coming in. It was the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that kind of led the way on that, if my recollection is correct. You point out, I think very correctly in your early framing, that the role of religion in the church is an ambivalent or maybe there's two sides, or there's a tension among the roles that religion can play. On the one hand, they often mobilize people to engage in conflict, but at the same time, they can be an actor that helps promote peace building and reconnect communities. I think because of the nature of your field work, you emphasize the second role, the church as peace builder. But I think in order to frame it up, you probably need a bit more on the I'll just say very controversial role that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church played during the war in northern Ethiopia. Was seen, for those of you who don't follow this in great detail, is that it was seen as the church was seen as reinforcing, applauding, legitimizing what the state was doing in mobilizing forces to go into Tigray and engage in that horrific conflict. And so, regardless of how you want to tell that story does have the second part of your binary. Maybe I'll just leave that. Well, maybe I will make it. In my core, when I'm not talking about Ethiopia, I really see myself as a comparative politics person, and I think in terms of as a comparativist. And comparativists can take within case comparisons within Ethiopia, and so in your case, I'm interested in how do you compare what the church did in this particular area where you have evidence, you have data, to what other similar organizations, institutions did. Now, similar is a hard thing to say because the Orthodox Church is kind of its own, sui generis in this part of the world. But I'm thinking of other non-state, non-armed groups. Like there was an Oromo Elders Initiative at one point that went out to in the western part of Ethiopia to try to negotiate peace. It didn't get anywhere, but it does suggest that there's another alternative way that non-state, non-armed groups can play the role that you are correctly identifying the Ethiopian Orthodox Church playing in this particular way. Now, it goes beyond your study here, but even a paragraph on to think through the question: is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church doing something different than what the other religions were doing, Islam or the Protestant organizations? Is there something unique or specific to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that they could do things that the Islamic Council or Makeni Jesus or the evangelical organizations could not do? Now I want to, with those things said, I also would love to have more information on teasing out how exactly this extraordinary mediation took place, that in the course of a horrific war with very few peacemakers and an awful lot of war makers, the church was able to try to negotiate not only sort of the local, the armed actors who were in the region at a particular time, but at a later time between the regional state and the Agao insurgent forces. And how did the church do that? Was it because this was a role that was long recognized, or that it had declared itself to be the mediator? Was it because it had legitimacy, that was the only organization with any legitimacy, and so it had to be? Another way, you in a very interesting way on the humanitarian part, talk about how the church, first of all, has a lot of resources. I mean, sort of absolutely, and in terms of other people in a war zone, they were able to raise not only their own money, but also go off to business people and say, hey, we need you to give us some money so that we can keep the government running and keep the electricity on or keep the hospital open. So the church, in addition to having, its role can be judged according to how is it perceived as being legitimate, it also has resources that others don't have. And then finally, it also has kind of logistical capacity. Churches have buildings, churches have communication systems, churches have networks of people, down to even more local than Lalibela. And in that way, other than the state, there's no other organization, I think, that could do that. So what makes the church uniquely capable of playing this extraordinary role? And then my final point, which is unanswerable, but at this point, but I just think it's where in some ways the payoff of your paper might come in, and that is, what are the legacies of the history that you're recounting of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in this area? What are the legacies or the lessons that might help us understand the potential for the Ethiopian national dialogue today, which seems to be what the Ethiopian government sees as its primary method, or at least maybe it's just a set of things that it wants to do, that it's calling the national dialogue more generally. But if that's the essential process by which the state is trying to promote peace, are there lessons or legacies from the history that you relate here that suggests that there's some ways that could be done more effectively, and some ways perhaps that are maybe more like non-starters? So I will pause there, and I don't know if you want to let Jurga respond or open it up for questions. I leave it to the rest of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Terrence.
I get a smattering of applause too. Huh?
We are going to open it up for question and answers. As those are thinking about their questions, I will give Jurga just a brief minute or two just to respond to maybe one or two of those in the moment before we collect a few questions from the audience.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor. And that was a very constructive and very insightful comments. I'll start with the literatures, and then basically what I try to look is what this state of conflict and religion is, and then try to base on this clash of civilization thesis and on this ambivalence of the sacred. So they both have their own basic assumption, but whether a driver of conflict or whether an instrument for peace, or be it meaning that whether it is in a paradox, then I try to situate this. And then of course there are different cases, and of course the literature is also confirmed of this religious institution as an actor for peace and even for ending war in Africa. Just we can see the case in Nigeria, and the case in South Sudan and Sudan conflict back in the 1970s, and even in the Mozambique case, where religious actors were basically playing a huge role as facilitating mediation between armed groups. So there are different cases in the literature, and there are whereby this religious institution are a big mediator for peace. As of course, how states make this sorted. Actually, this is where a bit different in normal contexts than in a war zone, because in a normal context, of course, religious institutions, the Orthodox Church or the Islamic religion, or they do have their own humanitarian relief organization associated to them. But what happened in wartime is that a bit quite different from the formally established humanitarian institution by the church, and also even not only for the church or for religious actors, but for other humanitarian actors in national and international labor were basically hard to reach. So because of the legitimacy that those religious institutions have in war zone, meaning in North Ethiopia at large, then this Orthodox Church have a wider presence since the 4th century, and even I see some data, especially referring the 2007 census, where over 90% of the people there are basically followers of these Orthodox religions, including Amhara and Tigray just together. So, I mean, it have a deep presence in the society, in their daily life, and even some structures. So, in that sense, when war happens, then they don't have any other options but to go to the church. Of course, I would consider it as where they can get some sort of relief, some sort of little peace there. But considering that this religious institutions are legitimate, this religious institutions are deeply present in the society, then the people have no option but to go there and to ask. Even every affairs that the people have in war zone, be it the daily matters related to food, health, or some sort of violence against civilians in war zones, then they're going and reporting to religious actors. So in that, then that's the only way of survival, or the only way to look at in war zone, especially in this particular context, of Lalibela and Sagoda case. Yeah, and then so I think that sort of mediation also emanates from this. For mediation, I try to look, being a mediator between armed groups in the civilian population on the one hand, and between the armed groups and the regional government. So one of the cases I have is, especially around Sagoda area or Walgenbra, there was sort of an Ago democratic movement was an armed group is operating around there, and then I see that the church leader and the archbishop around there tried to have some sort of three mediation attempts. Whether that was successful or not, of course I can say that was not successful enough, just like what happens in other parts of but because of the capacity, and because at some point of neutrality, and in certain cases the way they understand the conflict, the politics, and so on, then they're not capable enough to be a mediator there. And then of course, so there are some sort of capacity and neutrality gaps there, and then there was attempted, but that was not successful. But that mediation effort derives from all the legitimacy that the religious institution have in the society, and not only the society, even by the armed groups as well. So I think that's where these sources of legitimacy emanate. And then with this, maybe back to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Jurga. Thank you. So we'll open it up now for questions. We'll take a few at a time. So I'm already 1, 2, and 3. And if you don't mind using the mic, or if it's not next to you, if you could pass it down, we do have some online, and that will help them hear the questions as well. So thank you.
Hello, how are you? I have some questions. What gives the church its legitimacy? And I know that you talked about how, like, when there's war, you know, I guess the banks are closed and the church is able to provide a function. Basically, let me state it again. What gives the church its legitimacy? And basically, what other role besides just the religious? 'Cause I know is basically my question is, can the church be both a state, a non-state, and a state, a non-state, and sort of a company, or some sort of variation of that?
Thank you. Great, thank you. And then
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Nabiyu Meshesha. 4 days ago, on November 30, the annual celebration of St. Mary Zion Church took place in Aksum city of Tigray. And it's for the first time to be celebrated with huge number of followers, since the horrible massacre took place in the city during the war. In the celebration, thousands of followers across Ethiopia, including the Amhara region, it's very important, including from the Amhara region, participated, which I consider can be taken as an indication that a severely harmed social fabric among communities because of the war can be repaired, particularly the Amhara and Tigray. So my question is, how do you think can religious institutions and even the government can use such kind of community initiatives for peace building works? I ask this because I'm seriously concerned that such kind of community initiatives are overlooked by both the government and religious institutions in Ethiopia. Thank you.
thank you very much. And then just next to you.
Thank you. A question related to this gentleman's. I wonder if you could speak about what is the religion profile among different ethnicity, and what is the role of religion in kind of reconciling ethnic tensions during conflicts?
Thank you very much. Thank you for those 3 questions. So we have 3, the multiple roles of the church, and can they play them at the same time? The community initiatives and how they can be engaged for peace building, and then the religious profile and speaking to that. So Jurga, over to you, but Terrence, also, if you'd like to add anything, please feel free.
When I think of the state in Africa, then usually we need to consider it beyond the formal and well-established frameworks, in the sense that the roles that states are doing are also provided by non-state actors as well, and so we see state and society as well in Africa. And then if we look, for example, the case in Ethiopia, in certain areas where religious actors, traditional elders, even played the role of the state in that particular, even in the administration of justice, or in conflict resolution, or in some other public affairs across the area. So in that context, the formal state systems like government or like, then does non-state actors also play the context? So in war zone especially, this religious institution, they're formally they're not state actors, but they were acting as a state actor because they're doing what the state functions in normal politics or in normal situation in the society. So it's not the state, but the fact they are doing, including the management of public affairs from the health to water to electricity or any other thing. That's what. So in terms of role, yes, they are doing what the state are supposed to do. But as I said, in war zone, there was completely no state apparatus, functional state apparatus in that particular context. So that's so in this, yeah, they were doing as a state where there is no state. So sometimes if a religious institution are filling the gap where the crisis of social responsibility of the state. So that's in that sense a bit different to differentiate as a state or non-state, but a bit they are acting as a state actor where there is no formal status in that particular context. Religion, of course, in Ethiopia, mainly it's of course intertwined with ethnicity. At the same time, it also transcends ethnicity as well. So if you look up, for example, in Northern Ethiopia, be it in Tigray or Amhara, ethnicality may be a bit different. But if you look at religion, so sometimes it transcends that sort of ethnic category. And in that sense, then of course it's a bit difficult to look at religious profile of various ethnicity, but geographically, obviously, yes. So in the eastern lowlanders and mainly in southern lowlanders, then mainly Islamic religion have a wider presence. In North Ethiopia, Orthodox Christianity have a wider presence in certain southern areas of Ethiopia, some and Oromia regions as well. Then Protestant religions have a larger presence in the society. But that does not mean that a particular ethnic group is affiliated with a particular religion. So it's a multi-phase and a multi-ethnic society. So in that sense, religion, since they are transcending a particular ethnic group, then they can be considered as an instrument for reconciliation or an instrument for community initiatives, or especially fostering the relations among different people, different ethnic groups, and so on. So it depends on what initiative, where and what that particular initiative is, meaning be it by community-driven or be it by any other actors' initiative. But I do really believe that this religious institution can play a very positive role for reconciliation or for social cohesion and largely for peace building as well. So one of the interesting thing I see is, especially during the war, there are different armed groups, and the religious background that armed groups have, and the society where that, including Lalibela or Sekoda, ethnically they are a bit different, but religiously probably they have the same religious backgrounds. Even I see and I learned that even those armed groups were getting into religious institution, praying with the society, and things like that. So it transcends not only ethnicity, but also armed groups and the society, the local population. And of course, that can be huge resources for peace building or for peace initiatives in war-affected communities at large. So, yeah.
Thank you, Darius.
If I may make one further point, and I'll first make it very abstractly and then try to bring it to the particular case, and that is after a horror, such as the horror that Ethiopia experienced between 2020 and 2022, not to mention the conflicts before then and after then, but the question of reconciliation, it's very difficult to have the period of reconciliation before there is an accounting of for the violence and the violations that took place during the war. And the church, while it's an instrument of reconciliation, at least there has to be a discussion about what role did the church play in the war before you can expect to see the church play an effective role as the center for reconciliation. Because again, I'm not Ethiopian. I can see there's plenty of my friends from Ethiopia in the room, but that there's a lot of trauma there that needs to be discussed and recognized and documented, and I don't see a lot of people doing that, not only in the church, but in general in Ethiopia. The idea that we're just not, pretend the war didn't happen and let's go forward, is not a very sustainable way generally to have sustainable peace. Thanks.
Thanks, Darius. We'll take additional questions. We're seeing hands raised, so we'll start here, one, and then we have 2, 3, and we'll do another round after this as well. So, thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Ayn Alam. Thank you for presenting, and it's a great work. As someone who has been in Ethiopia up to 2023, and I have been fairly active in the local politics, and you focused on the positive aspects of religion. But Ethiopia is not a post-conflict state, but it is a state in conflict. So I think, yes, religious institutions and organizations in Ethiopia, they are opinion leaders. They are more influential than the state. I'm from the most southern part. Everywhere in Ethiopia, be it Orthodox, be it a Protestant, be it a local, religion by itself has a great influence to the people. Given the fact that its role in opinion leading, the religious institutions in Ethiopia has been enablers of conflict for the war, for whatever it happened, let alone standing neutral. Even some have been influencing the government not to negotiate, not to sit, not to talk. This is not a past history, but it's ongoing even today. So there are factions within every religious institution. So isn't it too early to consider religious institutions in Ethiopia as a means of peace? So my worry is, I think I can argue that we have to distance religious institutions from politics. Even during the conflict, if even these humanitarian activities that the church has been doing is kind of competition for credit. I have been there, I told you. So this religious organization gave this for these people, this organization gives that for the people. So there is aid politics amidst the conflict. So my worry is, isn't it too early to depend or to hope for religious institutions? So I told you, and I believe that we are in conflict, not we are in the post-state. So how do you weigh the positive and the negative role of religious institutions in Ethiopia? Thank you.
Thank you. We had 2 questions here to my right. Yes.
In fact, mine is not a question.
Right.
It's a very brief opinion, if I could.
Yeah, very briefly.
Okay. My name is Haile Melekotas. I'm working for an international organization. The reason why I'm here, the peace program is very important. We have been working for the last 4 or 5 years. So just to share my experience on this engagement, it's not really easy to engage in peace process in Ethiopia. I am very happy to hear untold stories from Lalibela and Sokota. my friend, he was mentioning the role of the church in the recent history of the conflict in Tigray. There were big church leaders who were advocating for the war, and they were, on a way, the machine of the war, which was happened for 2 years. That's cost us nearing to 1 million people in the north part of the country. So, yes, church has a big role for the last 2,000 years until the 1974, until the revolution. But after the divorce of the church and state, things are completely changed in terms of the Orthodox Church engagement in Ethiopia. I'm Orthodox follower. Again, I'm blaming my church leaders. So now the role of the church, the role of the religious leaders is really, really controversial. It's a very sensitive and it's still active engagement as we speak. Going forward, what we could do, not only in terms of war, but also in terms of post-conflict. We have Terence, he was mentioning the issue of reconciliation. So in the middle of the war, in May 2021, when the federal government, before the federal government left Tigray, we organized Business for Peace in Ethiopia. It's ongoing, a program in Ethiopia still. So we managed to bring the Tigray and Amhara business people to come all the way to sit in one room to influence their counterpart in regional government. But the big push was really came not only from the government, from the federal government, but also from some religious leaders. Going fast forward, so for the first time in our history, last year in October, we managed to organize a conference in Aksum by taking some Amhara from Lalibela, Gondar, Bahar Dar to open up the tourism sector on a way using the Orthodox religion in terms of business and the religion. We try to connect the
I'll ask you just to
Yeah.
conclude your point. Thank you.
Yeah, the tourism sector, which is mainly, if we talk about the north part of Ethiopia, Lalibela, Gondar, Aksum is 100% depending on tourism. When we talk about tourism, it's still 100% related to Orthodox. So we try to create the religion to business. So we're pushing the opening up of the airport. Fortunately, recently the airport is becoming functional. And for the first time, we had this year more than 1 million people in Aksum. So in a way, it has a big business element, but also in a way in terms of healing the two communities, the Amhara and Tigray, and also in a way the reconstruction, rehabilitation. So my point is to Yirga, okay, it's good to hear the role of the church leaders during the war, but we should think of now how we could work in terms of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and healing. There is a big division still between the two communities using the church.
Thank you very much. Sir, third, and then we'll turn back to our panelists.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Rusagar Abebe. Well, I have been following the role of religious leaders in Ethiopia for quite a while. And my background is also on what the National Council of Churches in Kenya and the South African Council of Churches did in post-conflict reconstruction and good governance. Well, I really like to really thank Yirga for what he has done, and of course Terence too. Well, as we are aware, the churches have a unique role which they can play in peace building. Unfortunately, I have to admit, I haven't heard that from Yirga. He was mostly focusing on the humanitarian work that they have been doing. And as Terence said, in the 80s, the JRP was instrumental in humanitarian assistance in the northern part of Ethiopia. And it was an initiative of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Mekane Jesus Church, the Catholic Church, the Lutheran World Federation, and the Catholic Secretariat, and has done quite a lot. and has saved quite a lot of lives. So that has been their area and expertise. Well, I would have really liked to hear from Yirga. What did the EOC did in the mediation effort in Ethiopia? Well, as you are aware, it is in their phase, and it is also in the Bible, which says peace making is part of their endeavor, and they should have done it. And do you think that they have really done that? Or, as two of my previous speakers said, that they were actually fueling the conflict in some part of the Ethiopia? That is one thing. And when it comes to the role of the churches, I think you should have really said more about other churches. The Interfaith Council, which has really done, well, have attempted in mediating between the different groups. And I think you should have also mentioned the Catholic Church, which has been more vocal than any of, including the Orthodox Church, who had had a very good experience on advocacy. So, well, I would like to really hear from you, have they really executed the role that has been given to them when it comes to peace building in Ethiopia? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll turn back to our panelists. You have a few questions. Is it too early to really call them peace actors? And I'm very curious about how you respond to that, given some of the data that you already have. Then connecting to other sectors and how they connected in. You've already mentioned some of the work and how the church was connecting with different business actors. And if you could expand on that and some of the commentary that was made there. And then finally, looking perhaps doing a little comparison to some of the other religious actors that were involved and the peace role that they played.
All right, thanks so much, Aaron, and thank you for very interesting questions and comments. I really appreciate that. And when I think of peace building, usually even what the literature says, it's not entirely a post-conflict. That's something which we do in a post-conflict period. So it includes programs or actions, measures, even during a conflict, even before the existence of conflict, like having this positive peace, and when conflict happens, this post-conflict reconstruction, rehabilitation, or other issues related to development, security, justice, all these are basically parts of peace building. So that's a very broader term. So what was interesting there is, of course, I really know the situation. It's maybe too early, but for what happens in Sakota and Lalibela areas where this field work was, and what happens to them between July 2021 and December 2021 was basically actually the context which I was looking for. So in this, then they can not only where formal cessation of hostility happens or formal end of war happens, but even during conflict, yeah, there are so many contexts. Even we may consider as a humanitarian thing, but it's a kind of survival issue for the people who have been in that particular war. So surviving those who are living in war are basically more than peace for the people. So in this context, yeah, there is different cases, scenarios where we can apply and broaden this peace building initiatives, like including the reconciliation, rehabilitation, or healing, or other aspects. But of course, there are different ways where positive kind of peacemaking roles can be done, even in the middle of the war. So that's what I see in Lalibela and Sagoda towns. So of course I try to look this positive mainly, but as I see in the framework, where I point out 5 main frameworks for understanding complex interplay of religion, conflict, and peace. One of them is that there have been certain incidences in Ethiopia where there is religious-based violences throughout the country. At the same time, even religious institutions and actors were instrumentalized. They were being used as a mobilization, especially this is the case where we see the war in North Ethiopia. So in that sense, of course, the religious actors were part of the mobilization thing, but they were also, as I said in the first presentation and later on, as mainly in ambivalence, where we can see both sides of the role of religious actors in a particular conflict. As to the relations with other interface thing, of course, the case study that I have may be very limited, but the lessons it have is that when we apply broadly, then it is to consider or to make inclusive of religious institution in every effort, and every peace-building effort, be it during the war or in a post-war period. So in this sense, since there are so many religions in Ethiopia, and including Islam, the Protestant religion, and the various traditional religions as well, then this can be used as an actor for peace-building initiatives. And of course, if there are further researches which considers the relations among religious actors, of course, the Interfaith Council or other actors or other dialogue forums for having this relations across the religious group will be important enough, but yeah, probably further actions and further research may be required to look at relations across different religious groups. So in that sense, then they can positively play peace-building roles in a multi-phase state. Of course, the country is considered as a deeply religious state, so in that, different religious actors can also play positive roles in peace-building. So whether they were following the faith and what have been in the Bible or the religious discourse, that's a bit, challenging. Of course, the way I see we're being an instrument of violence or an instrument of just legitimizing violences during the war, then I don't see that's a bit in conformity with religious ideas, but I think that's where these religious actors contributed for negative sides in war contexts as well, which I point in the 5 frameworks. So I think those are the points.
Thank you, Jürgen. Terrence, is there anything?
Go back to more questions.
Okay. I saw 2 additional ones last time. I know a lot of questions are coming up. This will be the last round that we can take questions. So I'd like to start here with Professor Tomi. Ma'am, you had your hand up as well. So we'll start there, and then we can take a few additional comments and then start to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'm Patrick Tomi. I'm a fellow here at the Africa Program. I want to focus on the church and restorative justice. More than 2 years or so ago, I was at the Russia-Africa Summit in Sochi when the Nobel Prize was announced for the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and we all went over to him and congratulated him. I did not think it was possible from the excitement that he showed that day that a horrific war would be on so shortly. And it brought back to memory something that goes back to 1996. Again, I was at the Aspen Institute Europe-Africa Summit in France. And somebody made a comment about why the brothers are fighting. Menawi and these are cousins. Why are they at war? And the former foreign minister of Mali, Ablaise Ouedraogo, who was sitting by me, said, watch, those Ethiopians will never talk to that guy again. Means like Ethiopians take these things to heart so much that perhaps the role of the church is in restorative justice, where people can make up and forget? Because it seems like these things just keep running and running and running. Is there any sense you have of the church focusing on helping let these pains go by? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Ding. I'm a freelance journalist. My question is, how did religion influence how Ethiopian Americans voted in the US 2024 elections?
Sorry, I just want to clarify. Your question is how the religion impacted voting here in the U.S.
Yeah, Ethiopian Americans.
Oh, Ethiopia. So perhaps I don't want to take you too far from your research, but perhaps you can comment on if there is a role, if you saw in your research a connection with the diaspora in the U.S. as well. I know there are quite a few hands, and I will turn back to our panelists, but we will have time after this to have some conversation, and Jurga will be here to be able to kind of speak to some of the research as well. But I will turn back to you, Jurga.
So, building on my previous comment is actually, there are different contexts where and initiatives, whether they are operationalized fully or not, where in April 2024, I see this transitional justice policy, which officially has been adopted, and then where it gives the space for religious actors to be engaged in truth telling, truth finding, or some kinds of reconciliation roles in that sort of initiative. Not only that, so the National Dialogue Commission or other initiatives, be it by civil society driven or by international actors as well, but due to the wider presence of this, they are deeply embedded in the society, and I think they have a very good role to play for peace building, restorative justice, and so on. Of course, they have their own internal rules and maybe internal laws, but and then even the religious ideas, the religious teaching that they have, whatever they refer, but they can either make different actors who have been there during the war, who have been used as an instrument, or in another sense, who have been used as a positive for peace building. Either they can set forums for dialogue, for conversation, and if possible, to have that sort of restorative justice among religious actors. So actually, what happens right now with that, we see even some sort of split conflicts even within the Orthodox Church, where our Archbishop is in Tigray complaining and declaring some sort of independence from the Holy. So, in addition to the positive roles they have for the society, there are certain issues within the church themselves, and then there are certain initiatives who can provide peace or any sort of reconciliation or any sort of conflict resolution within the religion themselves. Yeah, that would be good because some sort of religiously based violences not only affect that particular religion and other, but it affects the wider society and the state at large. So, in the sense, then yeah, if there is some sort of initiative, probably by state-driven or by any other actors, then that would be good enough for peace within the church. At the same time, if there are some forums, I think there was interfaith councils since 2010. They were doing, of course, good initiatives, but in the past few years, I don't see they were too functional in either having forums for dialogue across religions or across different contexts. So making functional of different forums, established forums like the Interreligious Council or any other initiatives would be, I think, good enough to have justice not only for among conflicting parties within the church, but among conflict party in the society at large. But overall, I think religious institution can also be taken as an agency, not only addressing the conflict within themselves or within their own adherents, but also within the wider society in Ethiopia at large, because the country is considered as deeply religious, and then in that sense, it would be good to take that into consideration and to take that in inclusivity in various initiatives, be it the national actor or international actor. Yeah, that would be my point.
Do you want me to do a quick answer on the diaspora voting?
If you'd like to.
I actually have done some work on the diaspora, so I can say a few things about it. During the war, there was a explosion, an upsurge of anti-Americanism in Ethiopia, and that played out in the diaspora as well with social media hashtags like Hands Off Ethiopia, and some leaders and very senior people in the diaspora blaming Biden and saying they'd never vote for Biden because he abandoned Ethiopia. How many Ethiopian Americans turned out to be single-issue voters is very hard to know. It's also very hard to know about the impact on the election because some of the largest communities of Ethiopian Americans are in Virginia, Maryland, Minnesota, California, all of which by significant margins voted Democratic. Georgia, maybe, because it was so close, but that's the kind of questions you have to ask about diaspora voting. And I wouldn't put it on religion. There was certainly a Tigray versus Amhara or Ethiopia nationalist division, but rather than an Orthodox versus something else division, not so much. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. We are going to wrap up this conversation. I want to just point you as well, we've recently had an article on both the Ethiopian and Somalia transitional justice processes. Both of those take two different forms on our blog, Africa Up Close. I'd encourage you to check out our blog, Africa Up Close, as well as some of the additional resources on our webpage around the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. The Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding is generously supported by Carnegie Corporation of New York and has been running for over 10 years, and quite a few resources that connect around these issues and build on past research as well. We also have an additional scholar, Latifa, who's with us today, who will be presenting next week on the role of social media in elections in Uganda, and we will be sharing that around and encourage you all to look out for that event as well. We have a few minutes afterwards. Please feel free to come and speak to Jurga about his research, and Terrence, if you'll be hanging for a few minutes, that would be great. So I know we weren't able to get everyone's questions and comments, and I apologize for that. And we want to thank you for your participation in this. Jurga's research brief, which we've been discussing today, will be released in the coming weeks, and we also encourage you to look out for that, and we'll be sharing it broadly. And finally, I want to thank all of you who have participated and joined us here in person and online. On behalf of the Wilson Center and the Africa Program, thank you. Thank you, Terrence, and thank you, Jurga, for sharing this important research.